Say that how delighted I am to be here and the wonderful warm Rosemount welcome I received this evening and the hospitality. And I suppose I'm both humbled and honoured to have been invited here to what's a very important event in the life of the local community. I was asked by Hugh Kane to provide a foreword for this book, which I willingly agreed to do, but being asked to launch it is a double pleasure, a double honour. I'm sure many of you have heard about the American poet Emily Dickinson. Emily was born into a prominent family in Amherst in Massachusetts in 1830, and she lived most of her life as a recluse, and she died in 1886, aged just 56 years. She spent the last years of her life more or less confined to her bedroom by choice, and most of her friendships were based entirely upon correspondence. Emily was a prolific poet and a very private one. She was a modernist, writing in a style which was way before her time. And during her lifetime she had less than a dozen poems published. And after her death, her sister discovered hundreds of unpublished poems in a drawer in a desk. And her sister recognised their importance and campaigned to have them published. And today Emily Dickinson is ranked only second to Walt Whitman as the most important American poet of the 19th century. Now, I'm not getting carried away, and I'm not going to suggest that the poems of William Kane are in the same league perhaps as those of Emily Dickinson. But like Emily, William Kane didn't see many of his poems in print during his lifetime. But nonetheless, he continued to write because he was driven to write. And he left a copybook with many of his original compositions, which had been passed down through the Kane family. So just as Emily Dickinson had her sister Lavinia as her advocate, so had William Kane a fine advocate in the person of his grandson, Hugh Kane, who was determined to see the poems in print. So here this evening we're celebrating two important Rosemount men, William Kane, the poet who wrote the poems contained in this book, and Hugh Kane, who transcribed and edited the poems for publication. William Kane, writing in the late 19th century, was in many ways carrying on the great bardic tradition of ancient Ireland. Bards were held in very high esteem. They were important officials in the court of a king or a local chieftain, and they performed a number of important roles. They were both chroniclers and satirists. For the people of the day, they believed that one way of achieving immortality was by being lauded in the works of the local bard. And Westmeath itself was rich in bardic tradition. There were the O'Dowleys, the O'Dailys and the O'Coughlys, both bardic families, and the Nugents in North Westmeath, who, though not native Irish, became more Irish than the Irish themselves, as they say. So this evening I want to pay tribute first to Hugh Kane, who is a hero of mine really, and for his continuing work that he's doing to record the history of his native place. Some time ago he published a little booklet called Rosemount Area, Private Records of Births, Deaths and Marriages, which he compiled from two sources. Firstly, from a manuscript notebook compiled by his grandfather, William Kane, who was born in 1851 and died in 1925. And incidentally, this is the same manuscript notebook which had the collection of poems and ballads which formed the basis of the book we're launching here this evening. And the second source for this first book was a notebook kept by Hugh's aunt, Bridget Kane, and these two sources provided very interesting snippets of information, such as little things like Nellie Gorry's marriage was arranged to take place on the 9th of November 1904, but Larry Maguire would not take her without a fortune. Delia Gorry went to England January the 17th, 1899. Now this was a famous breach of promise case involving Larry Maguire, who was a shopkeeper and publican in Athlone, who jilted his bride on the morning of their wedding. It said that he arrived at the house and they had agreed a dowry of £200, and Nellie's brother was sent out to meet her and said, you know, where's the dowry? We have £100. I says, where's the other £100? And he said, we just have £100. And Larry Maguire said, so raised his cap and said, soft day, Mrs. Gorry, and left the house and went back and opened his pub in Athlone. So, the court case that followed that had a 4-page supplement in the Westmeath Independent, where you could read all about the love letters of Nellie Gorry to Larry Maguire. She used to address him as Dear Mr. Maguire in the letters. Another snippet concerned Jem McCormack, who was beaten up in Moat at the fair on the 29th of January 1898. And Hugh Kane even records the names of his assailants: Pat Finn, John MacDonald, Tom McGrath and Tom Kilmurray. Unfortunately, he doesn't tell us what provoked the attack. Recently, when I met Hugh in Athlone Library, I discovered a link that I didn't know we had. We had been focusing on his grandfather, William Kane, but it transpired that when Hugh was in school in St. Finian's College in Mullingar, that my grandfather was a science teacher. So, quite a coincidence. Now to get back to the matter in hand, the poetry of William Kane. William kept this notebook, which I have already alluded to, and when I saw the state of the original manuscript, I was absolutely amazed at the fine editorial work which his grandson Hugh had achieved. It was no ordinary notebook. The contents were compiled in a period between 1873 and 1910, and the paper was obviously a pretty scarce resource. Yeah, you'll appreciate by looking at it there that it wasn't the easiest thing to decipher. It must have taken enormous patience and perseverance, and I believe that Hugh has served both the memory of his grandfather and of his beloved Rosemount very well by editing this fine volume. William Kane wrote, when he wrote, he was a farmer and a poet, and he sometimes wrote under the pen name Little Will. When I saw these poems first, I was immediately struck by the similarities between the poems of William Kane and those of one of my old favourites, a fellow Westmeath poet and contemporary of William's, that is John Keegan Casey, who wrote under the pen name Leo, and was the author of The Rising of the Moon and many other famous poems and ballads. And the more I learned, the more I realised that there were striking similarities between the two men. William Kane and John Keegan Casey, while both coming from humble rural stock, had the advantage of getting a high standard of education at a time when many children struggled to stay the course in national school. Sometimes I think today, when we're discussing education in Victorian Ireland, there's a tendency to dismiss it lightly by saying our children never got the benefit of secondary education. But we should remember that the standard of the primary education was extremely high. A young man who completed his national school education in the 1860s or 70s was fit to become a clerk in any office, or indeed a young man or woman who could go on and train as a monitor, an assistant teacher, leading to employment as a teacher once they had served their apprenticeship. When William Kane completed his education in the local national school, he went on to spend an extra year or two studying in a private grammar school in Moat. This level of education more than equipped him to become a teacher in 2 local private schools and to pass on the gift of education to others. One of the schools he taught in was in Suntown and was probably some sort of head school. And in his poem, The Suntown School of 1874, he writes, "The teacher, he is young and plain, the simple roving Willie Kane, of rugged mind but clever brain." And the second school that William taught in was the Balnabarna Night School, which apparently operated from 6 to 9 in the evenings. Obviously an institution which was way before its time. Anyone who reads the poems will realise that William Kane was both an intelligent and a well-educated man. So he was what we might call a folk poet, a chronicler of his native heath, a chronicler of the events of importance in Rosemount, both social and political. Like John Keegan Casey, he was a romantic, but he was also a realist. He wrote about the dreadful happenings which many of his neighbours experienced at first hand, including the scourge of emigration, in an age when very few of those who emigrated ever got the opportunity of coming back. He also lived through the land war and witnessed evictions and agrarian outrages, and these political matters also informed his writings. Many of those who were emigrating from southwest Meath in his time were bound for distant Argentina. There's still a huge Irish diaspora in Argentina today, and one of his poems is called To Cousin Mary Mason, Buenos Aires. William Kane's poetry is very much rooted in Rosemount and its environs. Family names and townland names he mentioned will still resonate with people in Rosemount today. In editing this book, Hugh has provided some excellent footnotes which help the modern reader to appreciate the value of the poems as social commentary. From reading the poems, I've built up my own idea of what William Kane's life in Rosemount was like. He was obviously one of the go-to people in the village, as we'd say today, and perhaps that torch has been carried on today by another of his grandsons, maybe Jimmy Kane. Although I don't know whether Jimmy writes poetry or what they call it. Or whether before he got married he wrote poems for nearly every good-looking girl in Rosemount, as his grandfather did. So we don't have the full story of William Kane's life, but I think it's fairly safe to say that if one wanted a letter written or a form filled out in Rosemount, William Kane was the man to go to. He was also surely a person who read out the news from the Freeman's Journal or the Nation for the benefits of his neighbours, and I'm quite sure that he enjoyed reciting his poetry for his friends. By publishing The Musings of a Man, this book that I have here tonight, Hugh Kane has ensured that the memory of Little will be perpetuated in Rosemount. I'm sure that many local families will recognise the names recorded in the book. The footnotes which Hugh has included are invaluable, and there are nice few photographs included also. At €10, this book is a steal. There should be a copy in every house in Rosemount, and I'm sure that Rosemount people living away from home would be delighted to get a copy in the post. So once again, I congratulate Hugh on what is surely a labour of love, and I have great pleasure in declaring The Musings of a Man to be officially launched.